When fire destroys a passenger jet at 38,000 feet and both pilots die from smoke, everyone faces certain death. But one passenger has a secret, an 11-year-old girl trained by her late pilot father. Now she must land the burning aircraft alone, or 143 people will die. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the tarmac as passengers filed through the jetway onto Flight 447, a Boeing 737 bound for Seattle. Among the travelers boarding that Tuesday morning was an 11-year-old girl named Maya Rodriguez, her small frame nearly hidden beneath an oversized backpack decorated with cartoon characters and colorful pins. Her dark hair was pulled into two neat braids, and she clutched a purple tablet case covered in stickers of unicorns and rainbows. To anyone watching, she looked like any other elementary school student traveling alone. A flight attendant with kind eyes and a warm smile greeted Maya as she found her seat in row 12, window side. "Well, hello there, sweetie. Are you traveling all by yourself today?" the attendant asked in that particular sing-song voice adults reserve for young children. Maya nodded quietly, offering a shy smile. "That's very brave of you. My name is Jennifer, and I'll be checking on you throughout the flight. Do you need help putting your backpack in the overhead bin?" Maya shook her head and lifted the bag herself, though it clearly took effort. Jennifer patted her shoulder reassuringly. "You're doing great. Now, do you know how to use the seat belt?" As other passengers settled into their seats, several glanced at Maya with the mixture of curiosity and mild concern that adults typically direct toward unaccompanied minors. An elderly woman in the aisle seat leaned over. "Are you flying to see your mommy or daddy, dear?" she asked gently. Maya's expression flickered with something that might have been pain, quickly hidden. "Visiting my aunt," she replied softly. The woman smiled. "How wonderful. I bet you're excited. Do you like playing games on your tablet?" Maya nodded politely and turned her attention to the window. What none of these well-meaning adults knew was that Maya Rodriguez possessed knowledge that would soon become the only thing standing between everyone on this aircraft and certain death. Her father, Captain Daniel Rodriguez, had been a commercial airline pilot for 15 years before cancer took him 8 months earlier. During his final year, he had taught his daughter everything he knew about flying. He had purchased professional-grade flight simulation software and spent hundreds of hours teaching Maya how to read instruments, interpret cockpit displays, and communicate with air traffic control. More importantly, he had taught her emergency procedures. Night after night, they practiced engine failures, electrical malfunctions, and fire scenarios. "In aviation, Maya, we prepare for things we hope will never happen," he had told her. "A good pilot knows that staying calm when everything goes wrong is what separates those who survive from those who don't." By the time he died, Maya could execute emergency procedures that some professional pilots might struggle with under pressure. But she was still just 11 years old, still grieving, still a child who kept her knowledge secret. So she played the role everyone expected, the quiet kid with her tablet and backpack. The aircraft engines roared to life, and Flight 447 began its taxi toward the runway. The takeoff was smooth and unremarkable. The 737 climbed steadily into a clear blue sky, ascending toward its cruising altitude of 38,000 feet. Jennifer stopped by Maya's row with a warm smile. "How are you doing, honey? Would you like some apple juice or a snack?" Maya accepted the juice gratefully. The cabin had settled into that peaceful lull that comes during the early part of a routine flight, with passengers reading, working on laptops, or dozing. In the cockpit, Captain Michael Thompson and First Officer Sarah Chen were conducting their duties with practiced professionalism. Thompson, 52 years old with 28 years of flying experience, was reviewing the flight plan while Chen handled communications with air traffic control. Neither had any reason to suspect that this routine Tuesday morning flight would become anything other than normal. They certainly had no indication that a catastrophic failure was already developing deep within the aircraft's electrical systems. The first sign of trouble came at precisely 10:47 a.m., 38 minutes into the flight. A warning light flickered on the electrical system panel in the cockpit. "Captain, I'm seeing an electrical fault indication on the number 2 generator," Chen reported calmly. Thompson glanced at the panel. "Switch to backup," he instructed. Chen's fingers moved across the overhead panel, engaging the backup electrical system. For a moment, everything seemed fine, the amber light extinguished. Both pilots relaxed slightly, but deep in the electrical bay beneath the cockpit, something catastrophic was occurring. A microscopic manufacturing defect in a critical wire bundle had existed since the aircraft rolled off the production line. When the backup system engaged, it sent a surge of power through the compromised wiring. The insulation failed instantly, and bare wires contacted each other in a shower of sparks. The sparks ignited the insulation material, and within seconds flames were spreading through the electrical bay, finding their way into a cavity behind the cockpit wall, where they encountered sound-dampening materials and began spreading rapidly, generating thick, toxic smoke. In the cockpit, multiple warning lights suddenly illuminated like a deadly display: fire warnings, electrical failures, smoke detectors, system malfunctions. Fire! We have fire! Captain Thompson's voice was sharp with urgency as he grabbed the fire suppression controls. Fire in the electrical bay, discharging suppression system now. He pulled the handle that released fire extinguishing agent into the electrical compartment. For a few precious seconds, both pilots believed they had caught it in time. But this fire had already progressed beyond what the suppression system could handle. Smoke began seeping into the cockpit, thin wisps at first, carrying the acrid smell of burning electrical components. Seattle Center, Flight 447 declaring emergency. We have fire indication and smoke in the cockpit. Requesting immediate vectors for emergency landing. Nearest suitable airport, Thompson transmitted, his voice controlled despite the terror of the situation. Every pilot's nightmare is fire, because fire in an aircraft at altitude is a race against time. Sarah Chen was already pulling up the nearest airport information, calculating distances, preparing to program the flight management computer for an emergency diversion. In the cabin, passengers were beginning to notice that something was wrong. The smell reached them first, that distinctive odor of electrical fire. Then came the smoke, thin tendrils seeping from ceiling vents, growing thicker by the second. Someone screamed. Others looked around in confusion and growing panic. Jennifer and the other flight attendants moved quickly into their emergency procedures. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm and stay in your seats with your seat belts fastened, Jennifer announced over the PA system. We are experiencing a technical issue and will be landing shortly. Maya watched the smoke with a sinking feeling. Her father's training kicked in. Automatically. This was bad, very bad, and getting worse rapidly. This was the kind of fire that brought aircraft down, that gave crews only minutes to get on the ground before catastrophic failure. In the cockpit, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The smoke was now so thick that Thompson and Chen could barely see their instruments. Both pilots had donned their emergency smoke masks, but visibility was nearly zero. We're losing hydraulics, Chen reported. Flight controls are getting sluggish. Thompson fought with the yoke, feeling the aircraft respond slowly. The fire was destroying the aircraft's systems one by one, and they were still 12 minutes from the nearest airport. Then the fire found the cockpit insulation directly behind the center pedestal. Flames suddenly erupted between the pilot seats, bright and terrifying. Thompson grabbed the cockpit fire extinguisher and discharged it at the flames, but the fire was too large. We need to get this aircraft on the ground now, Thompson shouted, but even as he spoke, he was suddenly overwhelmed by a coughing fit. Despite the smoke mask, he had been breathing toxic fumes for several minutes, and the combination of smoke inhalation and extreme stress was taking its toll on his cardiovascular system. Captain Michael Thompson clutched at his chest as a massive heart attack struck him. The pain was crushing, overwhelming. He slumped forward over the controls, unconscious within seconds. Sarah Chen saw him collapse and reached for him, but at that moment she too was overcome by the smoke. Even through the mask, enough toxic fumes had reached her lungs to cause her to lose consciousness, her body slumping sideways in her seat. The aircraft, now pilotless, continued flying on its last programmed heading, its autopilot still engaged, but its systems failing one by one as the fire continued to spread. In the cabin, smoke was now thick throughout the passenger compartment, and flames could be seen through gaps in ceiling panels. Passengers were screaming, crying, praying. The flight attendants were trying to keep order, but there was nothing they could do. The aircraft needed to be landed, and there was no one in the cockpit capable of landing it. Maya Rodriguez unbuckled her seat belt and stood up, her small body shaking, but her mind suddenly crystal clear. She had watched her father die, and she was not going to sit in her seat and wait for death to take her and everyone else on this aircraft. She knew what was happening, knew that the pilots were either incapacitated or dead, knew that the aircraft had minutes before the fire destroyed enough systems to make it unflyable. And she knew with absolute certainty that she was the only person on this burning aircraft with any knowledge of how to fly it. She moved toward the cockpit, pushing through the smoke-filled aisle. Jennifer saw her and tried to stop her. "Honey, no, get back to your seat. It's not safe." Maya looked up at her, and something in the child's eyes made Jennifer hesitate. "The pilots are dead or unconscious," Maya said with shocking calm. "I know how to fly. I'm going to land this plane." Jennifer's mind couldn't process what she was hearing. This was a child claiming she could fly a commercial jet. It was absurd. But looking into Maya's eyes, seeing the certainty there, feeling the chaos around them and knowing that death was approaching, Jennifer made a split-second decision. She stepped aside. Maya pushed through the cockpit door. The scene inside was nightmarish. Smoke so thick she could barely see, flames visible in multiple locations, both pilots unconscious in their seats, warning lights and alarms creating a cacophony of disaster. For just a moment, Maya's 11-year-old mind wanted to shut down. Wanted to run back to her seat and hide. But then she heard her father's voice in her memory, calm and steady. "When everything goes wrong, Maya, you take it one step at a time. Aviate, navigate, communicate. Always in that order." She climbed into the captain's seat, her small frame barely able to see over the instrument panel, her feet not quite reaching the rudder pedals. She was too small physically for this aircraft, but she didn't have time to worry about that. The smoke was burning her eyes and throat, but she forced herself to focus on the instruments. Through the smoke, she could make out the primary flight display, the navigation display, the engine instruments. The autopilot was still engaged, which was good, but she could see the cascade of failures across the system's displays. With shaking hands, she reached for the radio transmit button. When she spoke, her voice was higher and younger than any air traffic controller had ever heard declaring an emergency, but it was clear and controlled. "Seattle Center, Flight 447 emergency traffic. Both pilots are incapacitated. I am an 11-year-old passenger with flight training. I need immediate assistance to land this aircraft." There was a long moment of stunned silence on the frequency. In the Seattle Air Route Traffic Control Center, Controller James Morrison stared at his radio panel in complete disbelief. Had he really just heard a child's voice declaring an emergency? His first instinct was that this was some kind of sick joke, but the transponder code confirmed it was definitely Flight 447, and that flight had declared an emergency just minutes before. He keyed his microphone. "Flight 447, Seattle Center, confirm you are a passenger and the flight crew is incapacitated." Maya's response was immediate. "Affirmative, Seattle. Captain and first officer are both unconscious. Smoke and fire in cockpit. I estimate less than 10 minutes before fire compromises flight controls. I need vectors to the nearest suitable airport and landing instructions." The terminology was correct, professional, but the voice was unmistakably that of a child. Morrison felt his blood run cold. This was unprecedented, impossible, a nightmare scenario. But the clarity of the transmission suggested that whoever was speaking had at least some understanding of aviation. He made a decision. He would treat this exactly as he would any emergency and pray that somehow this would work out. "Flight 447, understand you have fire on board and need immediate landing. Nearest suitable airport is McCord Air Force Base, approximately 48 miles northwest of your position. Can you execute a turn to a heading of 320? Maya looked at the heading indicator, calculated the turn required, and reached for the autopilot mode control panel. Her father's training was there, guiding her hands. She selected heading mode and dialed in 320. The aircraft began to turn smoothly and properly, and Maya felt a tiny spark of hope. She could do this. She had practiced this exact scenario hundreds of times in the simulator. "Seattle, Flight 447 turning to 320, she transmitted, confirming McCord Air Force Base. "I'll need full emergency equipment standing by. I have approximately 140 people on board." In the control center, Morrison was now surrounded by supervisors and other controllers, all staring at the radar scope. The supervisor had already initiated emergency notifications, McCord Air Force Base was being alerted, and emergency equipment was rolling. Morrison continued his vectoring. Flight 447, continue present heading. Begin descent to maintain 12,000 feet. I'm going to give you vectors for a straight-in approach to McCord's runway 16. It's 13,000 feet long, so you'll have plenty of room. Maya acknowledged and began configuring the autopilot for the descent. But she realized they had a critical problem. The smoke in the cockpit was now so thick she could barely see the instruments. She needed to reduce the smoke, or she would be unable to see to land the aircraft. She reached up to the overhead panel, found the controls for the cockpit ventilation system, and shut off the recirculation fans while opening the outflow valve to maximum. This created a pressure differential that helped pull some of the smoke out. It helped marginally. The smoke began to thin slightly, and now she could at least see the instruments clearly enough to fly. The aircraft was descending through 30,000 feet, and Maya could see McCord Air Force Base on the navigation display. The distance was counting down. 42 miles, 40, 38. Each mile felt like an eternity, and she could feel the flight controls getting mushier as the fire continued to destroy hydraulic systems. Behind her, in the cockpit doorway, Jennifer stood watching in absolute amazement and terror. She had informed the other crew members of what was happening, and word was spreading through the cabin in whispered disbelief. The 11-year-old girl was flying the plane. Some passengers were praying, some were crying, but a strange kind of hope was spreading too. Maya keyed the radio again. Seattle, Flight 447. I need landing configuration guidance. I've practiced this in simulation, but I need to confirm the procedure for this aircraft type. Morrison, who now had a Boeing 737 operations manual in front of him, began to read out the landing configuration procedure. Flight 447, at 10 miles from the field you'll want to slow to 250 knots and begin lowering flaps to 5 degrees. At 5 miles, gear down, flaps 15. Final approach, flaps 30, target speed 140 knots. Maya's mind was racing through her memory of hundreds of simulated approaches. It matched her training. Affirmative, Seattle, that matches my training. I'm 26 miles out now. She paused, then added something that showed remarkable presence of mind. I should tell you that I'm too short to properly reach the rudder pedals. I'm going to need to land using primarily aileron control. Also, I'm planning maximum auto brake setting. Morrison checked the McCord weather. Flight 447, be advised, McCord winds are currently 350 at 8 knots, so you'll have nearly a direct headwind on runway 16. That should help with directional control. Maya acknowledged this information, feeling a small relief. A headwind meant she would touch down at a slower ground speed, and the near alignment with the runway heading meant less crosswind correction would be needed. The fire continued to rage, and Maya could feel the heat on her back from flames consuming the rear wall and spreading toward the instrument panels. She had to get this aircraft on the ground in the next few minutes. At 15 miles out, she began slowing the aircraft. At 12 miles, she reached for the flap lever and moved it to the 5-degree position. The aircraft shuddered slightly as the flaps extended. At 10 miles out, McCord Air Force Base was visible through the windscreen. Maya could see the long ribbon of runway stretching out before her, and lined up along the sides were emergency vehicles, fire trucks, and ambulances, their lights flashing. Seattle, Flight 447, I have the field in sight. Canceling autopilot and going to manual flight now. Her hand moved to the autopilot disconnect button, and for just a moment she hesitated. When she disconnected it, she would be truly flying this machine. If she made a mistake, there was no safety net. She pressed the button. The autopilot disconnected with a chirp, and suddenly Maya felt the full weight of the aircraft through the control yoke. It was heavier than the simulator, but it responded to her inputs. She made a small correction, aligning the aircraft with the runway centerline. 7 miles out, she moved the gear lever to the down position, and the aircraft shuddered as the landing gear extended. The gear position indicators showed 3 green lights, all gear down and locked. Good. At 5 miles, she moved the flaps to 15 degrees. She was now committed to this landing. There was no going around, no second chance. She moved the flaps to the final 30-degree position, and the aircraft settled into its final approach configuration. 3 miles. Maya could now see individual vehicles around the airfield, could see people watching this approaching aircraft with its smoke trail visible from the ground. Flight 447, you're on a perfect approach path, Morrison transmitted, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Maya heard something like hope in the controller's voice. Continue as you are. Runway is yours. All emergency equipment is standing by. 2 miles. The runway was growing larger in the windscreen, filling her field of view. Maya made tiny corrections with the control yoke, keeping the runway centerline aligned. She could feel sweat running down her face, mixing with tears from the smoke. Her hands were shaking, but she kept them steady through sheer force of will. This was for her father, for all the hours he spent teaching her. This was for all the people behind her, depending on an 11-year-old girl to do something no child should ever have to do. 1 mile. She was over the threshold approach lights. Now the runway was right there, a wide expanse of concrete that looked both enormous and impossibly small. Maya pulled the throttles to idle and began to flare, pulling back gently on the control yoke to raise the nose and slow the descent rate. Her father's voice was in her head. Easy, not too much. Let the aircraft settle. Wait for it. The runway rushed up to meet the aircraft. The main landing gear touched down first, and Maya felt the slight bounce as the wheels made contact and the tires chirped against concrete. Then the nose gear came down, and the aircraft was on the ground, rolling at over 130 miles per hour. The auto brakes engaged automatically, throwing her forward against her seat belt. The aircraft decelerated rapidly, the brakes doing exactly what they were designed to do. 60 knots, 50, 40, 30, 20, and then they were stopped, sitting motionless on the runway about 4,000 feet from where they touched down. Maya sat there for a moment in shock, unable to process what she had just done. Then training took over one more time. She pulled the engine fire handles, shutting down both engines. She turned off the battery and electrical systems, removing all power from the burning aircraft. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft within seconds, firefighters deploying foam and water. Emergency slides deployed automatically, and passengers began evacuating, sliding down to safety. The evacuation was chaotic but successful. People were crying, screaming, hugging each other, unable to believe they were alive. Inside the cockpit, Maya unbuckled her seat belt and tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't support her. The adrenaline that had kept her functioning had run out, and she collapsed to the cockpit floor, shaking uncontrollably. Jennifer, who had stayed near the cockpit door throughout the landing, rushed in, scooped Maya up in her arms, and carried her out of the smoke-filled cockpit. "I've got you, sweetie. I've got you. You're safe now. You did it." Jennifer was sobbing as she carried Maya down the aisle. Medical personnel met them as they came down the slide, and Maya was immediately placed on a stretcher and given oxygen. As paramedics loaded her into an ambulance, Maya looked back at the aircraft she had just landed. Smoke and steam were pouring from various openings as firefighters continued to battle the blaze. The aircraft was destroyed and would never fly again, but everyone aboard had survived. 143 people were alive because an 11-year-old girl had refused to accept that death was inevitable. In the ambulance, as oxygen flowed through a mask over her face, Maya finally allowed herself to cry, releasing all the fear and grief and overwhelming pressure. She cried for her father, who had given her the skills to survive this day. The story exploded across the media within hours. Video footage from the ground showing the aircraft's landing with smoke trailing from it was broadcast worldwide. The fact that the person flying was an 11-year-old girl seemed impossible, yet it was absolutely real. Investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board arrived that evening and began interviewing survivors and examining the aircraft wreckage. When they interviewed Maya in the hospital, where she was being treated for smoke inhalation, they were stunned by her technical knowledge and her calm recounting of the emergency procedures. The investigation would reveal the full extent of the electrical system failure that caused the fire, and Maya's actions would be analyzed by aviation experts worldwide. The consensus was remarkable. She had made exactly the right decisions at every critical point. Professional pilots with decades of experience stated publicly that many qualified pilots might not have handled the situation as well under such extreme pressure. Captain Michael Thompson had died of a heart attack during the emergency. First Officer Sarah Chen survived but was hospitalized for severe smoke inhalation and would require months of recovery. Maya Rodriguez became famous overnight, though fame was something she neither wanted nor sought. She was invited to appear on news programs, was offered book and movie deals, and received commendations from aviation organizations and even the president. The FAA faced questions about whether young people should be allowed to pursue flight training, with some arguing that Maya's success showed age-based restrictions were arbitrary, while others maintained her case was exceptional. What Maya wanted most was to honor her father's memory. She eventually started a foundation, using money from her unwanted fame to provide flight training scholarships to young people who had lost parents, particularly children of deceased pilots. It was her way of taking the darkest moment of her life and transforming it into something that might help others. The investigation led to changes in aircraft electrical system design and fire suppression systems. The specific wire bundle defect was found in several other aircraft, leading to a worldwide inspection program. On the one-year anniversary, Maya visited McCord Air Force Base for a memorial ceremony. She stood on the same runway where she had landed the burning aircraft. Beside her stood Jennifer, the flight attendant who had made the split-second decision to let a child enter the cockpit, a decision that had saved everyone's lives. Margaret Chen, the elderly woman who had sat beside Maya, was there too, along with dozens of other survivors. Air traffic controller James Morrison traveled from Seattle to attend, wanting to meet face-to-face the young girl whose calm voice had been so surreal yet so professional. A plaque was unveiled near the runway commemorating Flight 447. It listed Captain Michael Thompson among those who died that day but also noted that his legacy lived on through his daughter's actions. Maya placed flowers near the plaque, and for a long moment she simply stood there, remembering her father, remembering the terror of that day, remembering the weight of responsibility that had fallen on her shoulders. When she spoke to the gathered crowd, her voice was still young. She was only 12 now, but carried gravity. "My dad taught me to fly because he loved aviation and wanted to share that with me," she said quietly. "He taught me emergency procedures because he believed knowledge was the best gift he could give me. He never could have known his teaching would save 143 people. I was so scared that day. I'm not a hero. I'm just a kid who knew how to fly because my dad taught me, and I couldn't just sit there while everyone died." Her voice caught. "I miss him every day. But I know he would be proud that his teaching mattered, that it made a difference." The crowd applauded, many crying openly. These were people who had looked death in the face and been pulled back by a child's skill and courage. After the ceremony, Maya spoke with many survivors individually. A businessman told her he had been convinced he would never see his children again. A college student said she was now studying to become a pilot, inspired by Maya's example. A young mother thanked Maya through tears, saying her baby would grow up and have a life because of what this 12-year-old had done. James Morrison pulled Maya aside. "I've been a controller for 18 years, he told her. "I've handled thousands of emergencies, but I have never experienced anything like that day. When I first heard your voice, I thought it was impossible. But you proved me wrong. The way you handled yourself on that radio, the clarity of your communications, it was better than some professional pilots I've worked with. I hope someday you'll consider becoming a pilot, because the industry would be lucky to have someone with your skills." Maya smiled shyly. "I don't know if I want to be a pilot," she admitted. "Sometimes I think yes, because it's what my dad did. But sometimes I think that day used up all my courage for flying. I have nightmares about the smoke and the fire and feeling responsible for all those lives." Morrison nodded understandingly. "That's completely normal, Maya. What you experienced would traumatize anyone. Whatever you decide to do, I know you'll do something meaningful." As the day drew to a close, Maya stood alone on the runway one more time, looking up at the sky where aircraft were landing and taking off in normal patterns. She thought about the randomness of disasters, how a tiny manufacturing defect had set in motion events that should have killed everyone on Flight 447. She thought about how improbable it was that an 11-year-old passenger had the exact knowledge needed to save them all. Some survivors had called it a miracle, divine intervention, fate. Maya didn't know about any of that. What she knew was that knowledge had power, that skills taught with love could echo far beyond their teaching, that courage was not the absence of fear but the decision to act despite it. Years would pass, and Maya would grow into a young woman who chose to pursue aerospace engineering rather than becoming a pilot, wanting to improve aircraft safety systems so other children would never have to do what she had done. She would work on advanced fire suppression systems and would hold patents on safety innovations that would save countless lives by preventing disasters before they could occur. But she would always remember that day when she was 11 years old, sitting in a burning cockpit, too small to reach the pedals, too young to be responsible for so many lives, yet somehow finding within herself the knowledge and courage to do the impossible. She would remember her father's voice guiding her, would remember the terror and the determination, would remember the moment the wheels touched the runway and she knew they had survived. And she would remember that she had been part of aviation's legacy, that her story would be studied in safety courses, that her father's teaching would echo through aviation history. Maya Rodriguez, the girl who landed a burning jet alone at 11 years old, would carry that identity throughout her life, but it would not define her entirely. She would be many things: a student, an engineer, an advocate, someone learning to heal from trauma and loss. And sometimes, on the hardest days, she would close her eyes and hear her father's voice one more time. Maya, flying is about more than just controlling an aircraft. It's about making decisions under pressure, staying calm when everything goes wrong, taking responsibility for lives that depend on you. These lessons will serve you well in anything you do. I'm teaching you to fly, but really, I'm teaching you to face whatever challenges life brings with skill and courage and grace. He had taught her well. And on that terrible, impossible day, when an 11-year-old girl became the only person who could save a burning aircraft full of people, those lessons had been enough. They had been exactly enough. That night, after the anniversary ceremony, Maya sat in her bedroom at her aunt's house, surrounded by the normal artifacts of a 12-year-old's life: posters of musicians, schoolbooks scattered on her desk, stuffed animals on shelves. But nothing about her life had been normal since that day. She opened her laptop and began reading through the hundreds of emails that had accumulated over the past year, messages from children around the world who had lost parents, reaching out to share their grief and finding inspiration in her courage, messages from aviation professionals expressing respect for her actions, messages from survivors of other aviation incidents who understood the psychological aftermath of near-death experiences. One email in particular caught her attention. It was from a 13-year-old boy named Marcus, whose father had been a firefighter who died responding to a building collapse. Marcus wrote that he had been struggling with depression and anger, feeling like his father's death was meaningless, like nothing good could come from such tragedy. But reading about Maya's story, about how her father's teaching had saved so many lives even after his death, gave Marcus a new perspective. He wrote that he was now volunteering with the fire department's youth program, learning about fire safety and emergency response, honoring his father by helping others learn the skills that could save lives. Maya wrote back to Marcus, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She told him that grief was a journey, not a destination, and that some days would be harder than others. She shared that she still cried when she thought about her father, still felt the emptiness of his absence, still wished she could tell him about her day or ask his advice. But she also told Marcus that channeling grief into purpose, into helping others, into making sure their parents' legacies lived on through positive action, that was how they could transform tragedy into meaning. She encouraged him to keep volunteering, to keep learning, to keep his father's memory alive through service. As she finished the email and sent it, Maya felt a sense of connection to this boy she had never met, this stranger on the other side of the country who understood what it meant to lose a parent too soon and to carry the weight of their legacy. She realized that this was part of her purpose now, not just the foundation she had started, not just the advocacy for aviation safety, but also the simple act of connecting with other young people who were navigating grief and trauma, letting them know they were not alone. Her Aunt Maria knocked softly on the door and entered, carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. She sat on the edge of Maya's bed and handed her one of the mugs. "How are you doing, Mija? Today must have been emotionally exhausting." Maya took a sip of the hot chocolate, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. "It was hard, but also good. Seeing all those people, knowing they're alive because of what Dad taught me, it makes his death feel less senseless, you know. Like there was a reason for everything he put into teaching me, even if he never knew what that reason would be." Maria nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Your father would be so incredibly proud of you, Maya. Not just for what you did that day, but for the person you're becoming. The way you've handled the attention, the trauma, the pressure, you're remarkable. But I also worry about you. You're still just 12 years old. You should be worried about school dances and friend drama, not giving speeches and running foundations and counseling other kids about grief. Maya was quiet for a moment, staring into her hot chocolate. I know I grew up too fast, Aunt Maria. I know that day took away a lot of my childhood. Sometimes I'm angry about that. Angry that I had to be the one in that cockpit. Angry that I carry these memories and nightmares. Angry that I can't just be a normal kid. But then I think about all the people who would be dead if I hadn't been there. The businessman who got to hug his children that night. The college student who's becoming a pilot. The mother whose baby will grow up and have a life. How can I be angry about that? She looked up at her aunt, and Maria was struck once again by how old Maya's eyes seemed, how much wisdom and pain was contained in this small girl who should have been innocent and carefree. I think I can be both, Maya continued. I can be grateful that I could help and angry that I had to. I can be proud of what I did and traumatized by the experience. I can honor Dad's memory and still wish he was here. My therapist says it's okay to hold conflicting feelings, that healing isn't about choosing one emotion over another, but learning to live with complexity. Maria pulled Maya into a hug, holding her tight. Your therapist is right, and you're wise beyond your years. I just want you to know that you don't have to carry this burden alone. I'm here for you, always. And it's okay to just be a kid sometimes, to do silly things and make mistakes and not always have to be the brave girl who saved the plane. You're allowed to be human, to be vulnerable, to need help. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, sipping their hot chocolate, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Maya spoke again. Aunt Maria, I've been thinking about something. Next month is Dad's birthday, and I want to do something special, something that would make him proud but also help me feel closer to him. I was thinking maybe we could go flying, just a small plane with a flight instructor, nothing intense. I need to know if I can still do it, if I can be in a cockpit without panicking, and I think Dad would want me to face that fear rather than let it control me. Maria looked concerned. Are you sure you're ready for that? The therapist said you should take your time, not push yourself too hard. Maya nodded firmly. I know, but I've been having the same nightmare for a year, being in that burning cockpit, unable to see, unable to breathe, unable to save everyone. Maybe if I go flying again in normal conditions, in a safe environment with an instructor who knows my story, maybe I can start to separate the trauma from the activity. Maybe I can remember that flying was something beautiful Dad and I shared before it became something terrible. Maria considered this carefully. She knew Maya was right. Confronting fears rather than avoiding them was often the path to healing. Okay, she said finally. But we do it right. We find an instructor who specializes in working with people who have aviation trauma. We start small, maybe just sitting in the plane on the ground at first. And if at any point you feel overwhelmed, we stop. No pressure, no expectations. Deal? Maya smiled, the first genuine smile Maria had seen from her all day. Deal. Over the next few weeks, Maria made arrangements with a local flight school that had an instructor named Captain Rebecca Torres, a retired airline pilot who had experience working with people overcoming aviation-related trauma. When Maya met Captain Torres for the first time, she immediately felt at ease. Torres was in her 60s, with kind eyes and a calm demeanor that reminded Maya of her father. I've read about what you did, Maya, Torres said as they sat in her office at the flight school. What you accomplished that day was extraordinary, but I also understand that extraordinary circumstances can leave difficult scars. My job isn't to make you into a pilot, that's a decision only you can make when you're ready. My job is to help you reclaim something that was stolen from you, the joy of flying. They started slowly, just as Maria had insisted. The first session was simply sitting in a small Cessna 172 while it was parked on the ground with the engine off. Torres explained every switch, every gauge, every control, talking Maya through the differences between this small plane and the massive Boeing 737 she had landed. Maya felt her heart racing at first, her palms sweating, memories of smoke and fire threatening to overwhelm her. But Torres's calm voice kept her grounded, kept her present in this moment rather than lost in traumatic memories. The second session, they started the engine, letting Maya feel the vibration of the aircraft, hear the normal sounds of a healthy engine running smoothly. No smoke, no fire, no alarms, just the steady rhythm of machinery working as it should. Torres talked about her own flying experiences, sharing funny stories about training mishaps and memorable flights, gradually helping Maya associate the cockpit environment with positive emotions rather than only terror. By the third session, Maya was ready to actually fly. They took off on a clear afternoon, the small plane lifting smoothly into the air. Maya felt the familiar sensation of leaving the ground, felt the controls respond to her inputs as Torres guided her through basic maneuvers. And something remarkable happened. For the first time since that terrible day, Maya felt the pure joy of flying that she and her father had shared. No emergency, no pressure, no lives depending on her, just the simple pleasure of soaring through the sky. Tears streamed down her face as she flew, but they were different tears. They were tears of release, of reclaiming something precious that trauma had tried to steal from her. "Dad," she whispered, so softly that Torres barely heard her, "I'm flying again. I hope you can see this. I hope you know I haven't let fear win." Torres, understanding the significance of this moment, stayed quiet, letting Maya have this private communion with her father's memory. When they landed and taxied back to the flight school, Maya was exhausted but also lighter. Somehow, as if a weight she had been carrying had lifted slightly. Maria was waiting for them, and she could see the change in Maya's face immediately. "How was it?" she asked, though she already knew the answer from Maya's expression. "It was beautiful," Maya replied simply. "It was like Dad was right there with me, like he was proud of me for facing this. I think I'm going to be okay, Aunt Maria. Not today, maybe not for a long time. But eventually, I'm going to be okay." The sessions with Captain Torres continued over the following months, and gradually Maya rebuilt her relationship with aviation. She didn't know yet if she would become a pilot professionally. That decision could wait until she was older, until the trauma had healed more completely. But she had reclaimed flying as something that could be joyful rather than only terrifying, and that was a victory in itself. As Maya approached her 13th birthday, she reflected on the year that had passed since Flight 447. She had been interviewed by news programs, had spoken at aviation safety conferences, had met with senators and FAA officials about aircraft safety improvements. Her foundation had awarded its first scholarships to 5 young people who had lost parents, giving them the opportunity to pursue flight training or aerospace education. The changes to aircraft electrical systems and fire suppression that had been recommended after Flight 447 were being implemented across the industry, making future flights safer. But perhaps most importantly, Maya had learned that healing was possible even after unimaginable trauma. She had learned that legacy was not just about grand gestures, but also about small acts of kindness, responding to an email from a grieving child, sharing her story to help others feel less alone, choosing courage over fear even when courage felt impossible. She had learned that she could honor her father's memory not by being perfect or fearless, but by being authentically herself, flawed, scared sometimes, still grieving, but also strong and resilient and determined to make meaning from tragedy. The story of the 11-year-old girl who landed a burning jet would be told for generations, would inspire countless young people to believe in their own capabilities, would change how aviation professionals thought about emergency procedures and human factors. But for Maya Rodriguez, it would always be deeply personal, the worst day of her life, and also somehow the day that gave her purpose. The day she lost the last of her childhood innocence but gained an understanding of her own strength. The day her father's love saved lives even though he was no longer alive to see it. And that would always be enough.